What if the Catholic Church spent centuries systematically destroying evidence of one of papal history's biggest scandals? What if a pope ruled for over 2 years, commanded respect, then was completely erased? Not for corruption, but because they were a woman. I'm your host Marcus, and today on History Uncensored, we are talking about Pope Joan. Depending on who you ask, she's either history's most successful con artist or the victim of the Vatican's biggest cover-up. We're diving into a 1,000-year-old conspiracy involving alleged document destruction, mysterious papal chairs, and archaeological claims that the Church has been lying about its history. Fair warning, you're about to question everything you thought you knew about medieval papal politics. Let's start with the legend itself. Even if you don't buy the conspiracy, Pope Joan's story is wild. Medieval chronicles claim that around 855 AD, a brilliant young woman disguised herself as a man to get an education. Remember, women were mostly forbidden from learning, let alone studying theology. But Joan was a genius and fluent in languages, a master of philosophy and theology, charismatic enough to climb the church ranks. She went from monk to cardinal, all while maintaining her disguise. Then, in history's most audacious gender deception, she was elected Pope. For over 2 years, according to the legend, Pope Joan ruled the Catholic Church. She made decrees, appointed bishops, and ran the show from Vatican City. Cardinals had no idea. European kings and emperors bowed to her. She was, by all accounts, a competent, respected pontiff. But here's the medieval drama. Legend says Joan's secret was revealed publicly. She went into labour during a papal procession through Rome. Right there in the streets, in front of crowds, Pope Joan gave birth, revealing her identity, undeniably. The reaction was swift. Some stories say she was immediately stoned to death. Others claim she was dragged away and killed in private. Either way, the message was clear. This was a catastrophe that threatened papal authority. Now, for conspiracy theorists, here's where it gets interesting. After Joan's death, the historical record changed. Her story appears in medieval chronicles for centuries, then gradually disappears from official church documents. By the Renaissance, the Vatican actively denied she ever existed. The Church's official position today is that Pope Joan is a medieval myth, a legend from anti-papal sentiment and misogyny. They point out no contemporary 9th century documents mention her, and papal chronology has no gaps for her reign. But conspiracy theorists have a different explanation. Absence of proof isn't proof of absence, it's proof of a cover-up. Enter Pietro Ratto, an Italian journalist who claims to prove Pope Joan existed and that the Church covered it up. In his book The Torn-Out Pages, Ratto argues that the Catholic Church systematically destroyed all evidence of her papacy to protect its reputation. Ratto claims this wasn't just neglect on the part of the Church. It was an organised campaign of historical erasure that began after Joan's death and continued into the Renaissance. He claims embarrassing documents were targeted, papal records rewritten, and alternative histories created. Think about it. If a woman successfully fooled the entire Catholic hierarchy, was elected Pope, and ruled for years, that would be more than embarrassing. It would fundamentally challenge church authority and claims of divine guidance in papal selection. It would raise questions about other quote-unquote divinely chosen popes. Ratto argues the Church had every incentive to make Pope Joan disappear, and the power to do it. Medieval record-keeping was centralised in church institutions. They controlled the libraries, archives. If they wanted to erase someone, they had the means. But here's where the conspiracy gets really intriguing. Ratto and others claim traces of Pope Joan survived the purge, hidden in plain sight. One persistent piece of alleged evidence is the sedia stercoraria, the dung chair. Legend says after the Joan scandal, newly elected popes had to sit on a chair with a hole, allowing a cardinal to verify the new pope was male. Mainstream historians dismiss this as satire, invented by church critics. But conspiracy theorists point out these chairs actually exist in the Vatican museums today. The church claims they were ceremonial. Conspiracy theorists ask, why a hole? The rabbit hole goes deeper. Archaeologist Michael E. Habicht claims numismatic evidence. Some 9th century papal coins bear Johannes Anglicus, John the Englishman, matching some medieval accounts of Pope Joan's papal name. These coins have subtle differences: weight, design, Latin inscriptions. Habicht argues these weren't mistakes, they were intentional attempts to create a historical record while obscuring it. The logic: if you're the church trying to cover up Joan's existence, you can't make all evidence vanish overnight. It's too obvious. But you could subtly alter the record, create ambiguity, make it look like the name referred to a different pope. Hide the truth in plain sight. Habicht's theory: these coins are breadcrumbs, evidence left by church officials who knew the truth but couldn't openly preserve it. They were creating a coded historical record for future generations. Then there's the literary evidence. In 1866, Greek author Emanuel Royds published The Papes Joan, a novel with extensive scholarly footnotes. It blurred the line between fiction and history. What's weird, the Greek Orthodox Church condemned the book so harshly, there are debates if Royds was excommunicated. Why excommunicate someone for writing a fictional work about a mythical figure? Conspiracy theorists argue Royds had access to suppressed historical documents, possibly through Orthodox Church archives. They suggest his novel was a way of preserving historical truth that couldn't be published as non-fiction without severe consequences. The Pope Joan conspiracy has new life today, not just because people love conspiracies. With the Catholic Church facing scrutiny over gender equality and women's roles, Pope Joan is a symbol beyond medieval history. Feminists and church critics use her story, true or not, to argue against institutional sexism and the church's resistance to female clergy members. If a woman could successfully rule the church for years unnoticed, it questions theological arguments against female priests and bishops. The Vatican's continued insistence that Pope Joan never existed fuels this fire. Critics argue their defensive stance suggests fear of what acknowledging Pope Joan, even as legend, might mean for contemporary debates. Social media has also revived these theories. Reddit threads, YouTube channels, TikTok historians debate the evidence. The story has found a new audience naturally skeptical of institutional narratives and primed to believe in cover-ups. And as with all conspiracy theories, the more the church denies Joan's existence, the more convinced conspiracy theorists become that there's something to hide. It's a perfect feedback loop. Denial breeds suspicion, which breeds investigation, which produces evidence, which breeds more denial. Now, objectively, academic consensus is clear. No credible evidence Pope Joan existed. The story appears to be a medieval legend from anti-papal sentiment and gender anxieties. The evidence cited by conspiracy theorists has been debunked by professional historians. The coin evidence? Easily explained by primitive 9th century minting techniques. The chairs? Ceremonial thrones, not anatomy checking devices. Missing documents? Plenty of gaps in medieval records exist without requiring conspiracy theories. But what's fascinating is why the Pope Joan conspiracy persists. Not because the evidence is compelling, but because the story serves contemporary psychological and political needs. It gives us a narrative about power, institutional cover-ups, and the possibility that official history hides uncomfortable truths. So did Pope Joan exist? Probably not. Is the Catholic Church covering up history's first female pope? Almost certainly not. But does this enduring conspiracy theory tell us something important about how we relate to authority, gender, and historical truth? Absolutely. The Pope Joan legend survives because it speaks to universal human experiences. The desire to believe power structures aren't as solid as they appear, that marginalised voices can be heard, and that sometimes the most extraordinary stories might just be true. Whether you believe the conspiracy or are a skeptic, Pope Joan's story raises fascinating questions about how legends become history, how institutions shape narratives, and why some stories refuse to die. In our age of information warfare and distrust, maybe the most important lesson from Pope Joan isn't whether she existed, but why we want to believe she did. Sometimes the most powerful truths aren't found in facts, but in the stories we tell ourselves about the world we wish we lived in. So what do you think? Is Pope Joan history's greatest gender-bending con artist, or the victim of Christianity's most successful cover-up? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into medieval conspiracy theories, subscribe to our channel. We here at Dark Ages Uncensored appreciate your support. Until next time, remember, history is full of stories stranger than fiction,